Okay, here we start today with our introduction to object-oriented programming. So underneath our schedule under week 2, introduction to object-oriented programming is what we're going to be going over today. So if you open that link up, it looks like this. All right, the objectives of this particular lesson are to define object-oriented programming terminology, discuss objects and reference variables, demonstrate how to create and use objects. So what is object-oriented programming? It's one of many of Java's languages. Objects are used to represent real-world entities. This allows us to map out our program to real situations that our programs will be representing, and it can make it much easier to solve problems. Some terms that we will need to know are what is an object, an attribute, method, class, and encapsulation. So an object, in real world, objects, they share two things. They have a state and a behavior. For instance, this dog over here has some states. It has a name, has a breed, has an age. You can tell whether or not it's hungry. These are state characteristics. Behaviors of this dog. It may bark, fetch, sleep, or eat. So they map to real-world objects. They too have a state and behavior. So attributes. These are going to be things to define or represent the object's state. They can be primitive data types or they can be other objects. For instance, we may have a state of width, height, color, and name, but the attributes for those will be that this width is defined as a primitive data type of an integer, whereas this color might be will have the attribute of the color class or color objects. Other objects or classes are represented with capital letters, and primitive objects or primitive data types are not. So some methods. These provide a way to execute a behavior on that object. So say, for instance, we have a Mr. Orange, and it represents a room that has a width and height. Well, we are able to get a method like getWidth and run that on Mr. Orange, and we will produce the values for the width of that object. So we can do things like setting width and getting width, and maybe we can even get the area, and we could possibly even draw this. So methods, they can also be referred to as functions, operations, or actions. A class, this defines the attributes and methods of a type or class of objects. It is a blueprint from which other objects are created. Classes define new compound data types. So over here we have an example of a Lego character. Every Lego person has a shared set of attributes and methods. They have a defined head height, head width, body color, etc. But they also may have some methods that would be things like move right arm, move left arm, and etc. So when we create an instance for this class, they will have specific characteristics for each individual Lego character. So we can add things like the color of their hair, the color of their uniforms, and maybe any attachments that they may have. So we have a class that gives a general blueprint, and then we define new attributes for each instance of that class. Encapsulation. This is a technique of controlling and protecting the data of an object. We use the methods to control those public and private. So if we want to let the data be out there and be known to other classes, we will make that public. But if we don't want to expose it, we would make that private. The methods might be private. And we'll get into greater detail on those later. Okay, so again, some terminology. We have those object, attribute, method, class, and encapsulation. Java API, or application programming interfaces. These are important. This is predefined classes for us to use. They're ready to go. There are 4,000 of them ready to go, so that's nice that we have the availability of using those. So let's take a look at our APIs. By clicking on there and transferring over to this. Let's just take a look at one that we may be using today, which is going to be the color class. So these are all the classes that have already been predefined for us. So let's go down to color, way down here, because there are a lot. So color. This particular class, color class, has a bunch of different modifiers. We can have the colors of black, blue, dark gray, green, orange, pink. These are already ready for us to go. In order to make an instance of this, make an object, you'll need to do a constructor, and we'll talk a little bit about that here shortly. I think we should go back. Sorry, there we go. Packages that we are going to be using and become familiar with will be the java.language. This is the string class that's included by default, so you won't have to ever import that class. We might use the utility class, the input-output class, graphics and user interface classes, and text formatting classes, and the java.swing, which will extend graphics and user interface classes. We will show you how to import those here shortly, and it is really pretty easy, so don't get too hung up on this yet. How to use classes and objects. Well, the steps to create and use an object, we do need to have the class imported from the Java API. We want to declare that we want to create an instance of that class, which would make an object. We need to instantiate our object by using a constructor, and then after that you can invoke or call methods on our object to perform desired operations. So a constructor, we have various ones here in our API we can look at for color. If we go down here, here is constructor and description. So we take a color class and we have these available to us. This one would create a color in the specified color space. The ones we typically tend to use are the RGB values and maybe an A value, which would be an alpha value that is starts to talk about transparencies. So we will probably mainly use this one down here and possibly this one if we have not a whole number, but a decimal point for our RGB values. Okay, so importing classes. All classes in the java.language package are automatically included in a program. That would be your string class. But when we want to use a class from a different package in the Java API, we will need to import it at the top of our program. Something like this. If we want to have use of the color class and all the methods in the color class, we will need to import the library java.awt.color. And there's also a wildcard one if you want to do that one, java.awt.star, and that is all classes. I'll show you a little bit more about how to import those here when we get into some coding. Next, you'll need to declare an object or an instance. We assess our objects using declared variables. We access those using declared variables, just as we did for strings and primitive types. In fact, like we talked about, string is a class. So we have a type string with a variable name, class name. It is of type string. This one here is a color object, and it has been called turtle green. That is the variable that we're naming, and it is of a color object. So the name of the class is the type of the variable. Class names use title cases, not camel cases. So when we have a class name, they are capitalized, and the variable names are camel case, so they don't start off with a capital letter at the beginning of the variable name. Next, we will instantiate an object. Instantiate or create an object, we use a special method provided by the class called a constructor. The constructor defines the attributes of the object and what attributes the object needs from the user in order to create it. And we give the attributes to the constructor through some parameters. The name of the constructor method is always the exact same name as the class itself. So we're going to get into that here pretty soon. We're going to code up a color object. So let's use this as an example here. To create an object, we're going to do we're going to make a constructor, and it has a class called color with the parameters red, green, and blue involved in those. So we will then use the constructor to create a new object. So and we use the new operator. So let's make a color one right here. I'm going to make a color object named turtle green. It's going to take in a new color values of RGB, and let's just use those there. So let's try that for now. Let's see what we can do. So we need to get let's go right here under our week 2. I'm going to create a new class. I'm going to call this turtle, and it will have a main method in there, and I'm going to bring that to life here. So let's do our it did say that you want to import the library first, but I have found that an easier way to do that, instead of trying to remember all the specific library names and syntaxes, is if you start to use an object that has a library reference, it will tell you that you'll need to import it, and it will do it automatically for you. So right now this color has been underlined because we don't have the imported class. But if I hover my cursor over that color, it says here import color java.awt, and it does it for you. Prior to your class heading here, it gives you that new color library. So that's an easy way to do that. So we've now created a new color object called turtle green with the values of red, green, and blue there. So constructors return a reference to the object that was created in the computer. So this particular turtle green is referring to a point in memory that holds its values of RGB, those 63, 163, and 44. That information is held somewhere in your memory, and this object is just pointing to that. It points to somewhere in the computer's memory. And you may have an alias for this. So you might have two variables. You might have an object that you create, a color object called turtle green with these values for RGB, but then you also might have another object called grass green that references that particular location in memory as well. So what we have done here is we have now pointed to the same place. So they both have the same values. This value here was given to turtle green. Turtle green's value was given to grass green. And it does say here that it does not make a copy. It just points those two names to the same location. For instance, if I told everybody in class where I lived, I don't get 10, 12, 14 new houses. What I do get is just everybody knows a point in reference of where I live. Primitive variables versus reference variables. Like we had talked about, these reference variables just point to a place in memory, whereas primitive data types actually store the value of that. So my number has a value of 10, and your number has a value of 10 as well. So that's pointing to a specific place. All right, invoking methods. This is fun here. After we get our object instantiated and we have an instance of that, we can call methods from that class using a dot operator. So let's look at some of the methods for our color class by chance. So let's go here. Color methods are going to be down here. So we have all of these methods that are available for your color class. And you'll use the dot operator to get those. I'm going to show you how to do that. The dot means do something, like I'm going to get the color. I'm going to do something like get RGB, get red, get hash code. These are all methods that I can use on a color object. So we have our variable name, the method name, and then the parameters that go along with that. Let's take a look at what that might look like here. So I'm going to go into our code here. So say, for instance, I'm going to make a new variable like an integer, and I want to know my blue color. The blue color for this particular object, turtle green. And I'm going to just say blue color is equal to turtle green. Now, when I hit this dot, I get all of these methods that are in our API. All those ones that were there now pop up. So all of these are methods I can use on my new object, my new color object, turtle green. So what I want to do is just get my blue value. So I find get blue there. I double click on that and I hit a semicolon at the end. And it looks like I now have that. So if I want to see if that actually worked, I'm going to do a print line. So print line here to see what value was actually held in this blue variable. So I'm going to say blue. And I'm going to run that, see what we come out here. It comes out as blue as 44. So RGB, it does work. It pulls up that blue value. So that's how you can use that dot operator right here. So turtle green is our new object that we have created, a new instance of that object, sorry. And we have used the dot operator to get the method to apply on that new object. So we have here again a lot of different ones we can use. It would be important to go through the API a little bit if you get confused. It does talk about important things, but it is very, very large, so don't get overwhelmed with that at this time. The first, will need to have a return type. So this is the type that are going to come back here. So when we have a return, that is necessary to be part of that. Otherwise, it doesn't know what you're going to ask in return when you do a method on that object. It won't know what to return. So you do need to have a return type. Eclipse will catch that for you. It'll say red underlined usually, and you can hover over that, and it says add return type of some sort. So we did that one there. We invoked that method. And we've done this here, so we try to figure that out already. So we're going to try a new one here. Let's see if we can use this and put it all together. All right, we need to make a constructor that takes an integer value for red, green, and blue, and an alpha. We're going to do an opacity, an alpha, I think that's what we're going to talk about. We need to declare a variable of type color called myColor. Instantiate a new color object using the constructor you found and assigning it to myColor. Get the red, green, blue values using the methods from the documentation. Invoke those methods on your myColor object and store those in separate variables RGB and then print those to the console. So let's do this one at a time. First is we need to make a constructor. It says find the constructor that takes in values for RGB and alpha. So if you wanted to go in here, we're going to color. We go to our constructors and we're looking for an RGB and alpha. So this is one right here, color, int R, int G, int B, int A. That would be one that we could use. And these are all in values of 0 to 255. So if you did anything less than 0 or greater than 255, it's not going to know what to do. So let's go back and make our first, well, it says here we need to make a constructor that takes in those values. So I'm going to do a new class here so I don't get these too confused. I'm going to do a new class, and I'm going to just do this one like maybe color tester. And have a main method in there so it knows what to do. It's going to run it there. Okay. So I've got this color tester class, and we're going to make a new object, a new color object. So color, and it said to make it myColor, and it's going to be a new object, new color object with the values. Just with some values. I don't think that it gave us specific values that it wanted. It just said it takes in integer values. Okay, so that's fine. We'll just make some values up. Let's go with, like, say, 255, 125, 100, and maybe 200. So now then everything, we have to import our library. That's what this is saying. So it's an easy way to do that is to hover over that object and import our library, and now it is happy with us. Next it says we've done the variable, we've instantiated it using a constructor. We need to find the red, green, and blue values, and if you need to refer to those in here to get those values, get blue, so it's just int is the return type, get blue, and then the parameters, it's going to be somewhere between 0 to 255. So let's try that out. We need to get the RGB values, I believe is what it said. Back up here. RGB values for those. Okay, so let's go, and it's an int. So let's go R is equal to, and we are operating this on the new object that we created. So myColor. Oh, I didn't run double. myColor dot, okay, now this is R, so I'm probably going to go with red. Get red. That would be appropriate. If you want to be more specific, we could even go int red, get red. Int blue is equal to, you take your object that you created and you run the dot operator on that by hitting the period dot, and now we're looking for blue. Get blue, and we're going to go int R green. Sorry. And green. Okay, so we have those, and then it did say next is that we just simply need to invoke the methods on your color object to get those separate values, RGB, and then print those to the console. So now all we need to do is just print a print line. I'm going to go red plus red, and then we'll print that out. We're going to do blue, and we're going to do green. So let's run that and see what we've got. Red, blue, green. 255 RG is, I got those a little bit backwards. I think that for coding purposes, I want to make sure I print those out in the right order so that it looks better. RGB. I'm going to do that. Print that out. So it goes 255, 125, 100. There you go. And we could even print out alpha. And let's see what that looks like. Int. Sorry. Here. Get alpha. So 255, 125, 100, and 200. Great. Let's check back to our specs and see how we're doing. Okay. So we've used that class and objects, and we used the methods on those. Here's a wrap up. We should know by the end of this class, object, attribute, method, our API library, constructors, how to instantiate, invoke, use the dot operator, what a reference variable is, and an alias. So that'll get us through, and we'll do some more coding with these fun things and concepts later.